take it from that. I can only see one screen that's a no. Next is the annual report and accounts. The 2019-2020 annual report and accounts were circulated to members following their acceptance by the Charity Commission and have been available to members in advance on our website. Gary will give some informal highlights of our current work in a moment. Are there any formal questions relating to the annual report or accounts? No, I take it that's a no then. Gary? Oh, sorry, missed a bit. This is trying to look at two screens. Thank you. Could I ask all the members in favour of accepting the report and accounts to raise your hands, please? We can all wave at each other. Are there any abstentions? Anyone against? No? Okay. Thank you. The report's therefore accepted by the membership. Next item, I will hand you back to Gary for because it's regarding a special resolution.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, so we have the resolution which is proposed actually by the current Board of Trustees, which is to adopt a new set of Articles of Association. So this is a special resolution, which means that 75% of those present must vote in favour for it to be passed. So just in summary, it has been circulated in advance, but in summary, we've now been in operation as a charitable company for almost 7 years, and our current articles do include a number of clauses relating to trustees that have become somewhat impractical and a little bit challenging to continue to comply with. So the proposed changes have been fully summarised in the papers that have been circulated in advance. Again, in brief, these proposals are to reduce the minimum number of trustees. We have no intention of going to that lower number, but we want to have a minimum by which we can operate. Looking at changing to 3-year fixed terms of office for trustees rather than by thirds, and to increase the maximum terms for both for trustees broadly and also for trustees who are then officers, so chair, treasurer, vice chair. We're looking to simplify the nomination process, also to remove, we have currently a bit of an artificial distinction between the types of trustees based upon whether they're voted for by a member organisation or as an individual, which is artificial because when you become a trustee, you must then act in the best interests of Support Staffordshire, which has nothing to do with how you were nominated to get there. And then lastly is to allow formally for remote AGMs and trustee meetings, which are permitted currently by national regulations, but we want to allow for that in future to have them actually specifically written into the articles. So are there any questions from any members who want to ask about these proposed changes?
No. Well, in that case, the resolution is therefore passed and the new articles become effective immediately.
I do need to just get a raising of hands.
Oh, sorry, right. Can you, if you accept the amendments, could you raise your hands, please? Okay.
Great, thank you.
So that's passed. Right. I'll hand you back to Gary again now for the conduct of the election of trustees.
Okay, thanks, Jan. So again, in accordance with our articles, both our former ones and our newly adopted ones, any member may be nominated with their consent to stand for election to the Board of Trustees at the AGM. The deadline is passed and we've had completed nomination forms from 4 additional members whose personal statements have been circulated round just over a week ago to all members. So those 4 are Elaine Day, Ian North, John Everett and Martin Peake. Again, we like to ask, are there any questions which you wish to put to those candidates? Nope, I can't see anybody indicating there. Thank you. So those 4 nominations have been reviewed by the current board and are endorsed for election by the board. So in that case, I'll take each in turn. So Elaine Day is an individual member. She's nominated by Jan, who's also an individual member. Elaine's had to give her apologies today. She has a prior engagement, but she's been a trustee with us in an appointed capacity for the last few months. So can I again ask for those in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much. So Elaine is, I can't see any, I think everybody raised their hands. So if that looks the case, I'm not going to ask for against and abstentions. It's actually easier to do this on Zoom than in a room. There aren't any against or abstentions, are there, for that? Nope. Okay, so Elaine is duly elected. Ian North stands as an organisational member. So he's nominated by East Staffordshire Family Support Services, otherwise known as Harvey Girls and Dads for Dads. Again, Ian has a contract meeting today, a contract review meeting, so you have to be at that. Again, can I ask you to raise your hands if you're in favour of electing Ian? Again, that looks like a clean sweep to me. Thank you. So Ian is duly elected. John Everett, who is nominated by SAFA, and I think he's in the room. He is. So do you want to pop your camera on, John? You want to say hello? You just unmute at the moment. There we go. You just unmute, John.
So I said, ignore the background. That's just come from a recent exercise. I'm not in the police headquarters.
Well, it was quite impressive, actually.
I was helping let out yesterday.
Grand. So can I ask for those in favour, please? Grand. And again, that looks to me like a clean sweep. So thank you, John is duly elected. And lastly, Martin, who I haven't been quite good enough to see if Martin is in the room or not. Can't see you. He may well have had to give me his apologies. No, I can't see him. So, but lots of you, I'm sure, will know Martin, organisational member nominated by Beat the Cold. Again, those in favour of Martin's election. Thank you. Again, that looks like a clean sweep to me. So Martin's elected. So additionally, because of this change, we've had the change in the articles that you just approved. We've had nominations received for 3 of the current trustees because their current term of office would come to an end under the new rules, if that makes sense. So there's a little bit of, I guess, uncertainty there as to which rules apply. So we've kind of gone for belt and braces. So they all agreed to stand down, and but they've all offered themselves for re-election in order to ensure that kind of transparency and full alignment to the new articles. So they are Christine Thomas, who's had to give her apologies at last minute today to help one of her member clients. She's nominated by Jack and Jill's Preschool Nursery, one of our members. There's Jan, who you've met as our chair, who's an individual member. He's nominated by Rowan Crozier, who's another of our individual member trustees. And then John Downey, who is on the call as well. Do you want to just say hello, John, who's our treasurer?
Mute. Hello.
There he is. Hi, John.
Hi.
Who's nominated by Helen Titterton, who is also on the call and is also one of our individual member trustees. Given that they're long-standing members of the board, I've just to speed things up a bit, I'll take those on block unless anyone objects to that. Nope. So can I therefore ask for those in favour? Thank you very much. Again, that looks to be a clean sweep. So all 3 of those are duly re-elected. So I'll say congratulations, or perhaps commiserations to those 3 long-serving trustees. It's good to have you back on board, and I'll hand back to Jan. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all my fellow trustees for their support this year. It's not been an easy year, as you can imagine, and we've made a good team, I think, between us. Next item are member resolutions, but there are none on this occasion. So that actually brings us to the close of the formal part of the AGM, but I just wanted to say a few thank yous. Firstly, to all our partners in other organisations who have supported us during the year, thank you for your ongoing commitments and investments of time, funds and energies in our organisation. Secondly, a big thank you to our staff and volunteer team. This year has not been an ordinary year by any stretch of the imagination, and the way they have risen to the challenge and the commitment and dedication they've shown over the last 12 months has been truly inspirational. So a big thank you to the staff. And last but not least, to yourselves, our members in the VCSE sector. You've shown in this year what we've always known, that you really are the backbone of society. Where centralised services were struggling to cope, local groups stepped up, filled the gap, delivered across the county from individuals to organisations, and the effort was absolutely magnificent from all our member organisations. So it's been a privilege for us to support you during this very difficult period. So that, as you know, if you've been before, I don't give long speeches, but I do want to say that those thanks are heartfelt across the board. And so I'll pass you back now to Gary as the formal business is closed. Who's still on mute and thinking about it.
Thank you, Jan. I'm just manoeuvring my screens around. So I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully this will work. Okay, so you should be able to see my slide presentation, hopefully. Give me a moment. I'd like to see some faces. As we're now out of the main business of the AGM, you may do as you wish with your videos. If you want to come back onto video or if you want to go off, that's entirely up to you. It would be nice to still see some faces though. It's not nice presenting to a completely blank screen. So if you want to stay on, please do. That would be most welcome. I'm just going to talk to only about 4 slides. I won't give you kind of all the facts and figures of everything we've ever done in the last year. I'm going to talk a bit about COVID. I'm going to give you a slightly broader update, and then I want to talk about a piece of work that we've just recently published around the state of the sector. So it would, I couldn't talk about the current year without talking about the COVID response. And I was just reflecting, as it's been just over a year, we moved about a week early. We moved to home working on the 17th of March. We started giving advice properly, formally to groups the next day. We started to get that beginning of those inquiries for groups around, what do we do? How do we do this? And we'd spent a couple of days, we pretty much totally restructured our website. And that went live on the 19th of March. And interestingly, the national lockdown didn't actually start till the 23rd of March. And I think we weren't atypical in that regard. The voluntary sector was straight out the starting blocks on this, really before most of the statutory sector had even kind of got into the starting blocks, if I'm honest. And I think, that was a real tribute to the responsiveness of the sector. Our response was a collective response. It was about encouraging neighbourliness through the web content, through social media. We really quickly moved to try and encourage this highly localised support at a street by street level. We didn't invent that, but we certainly encouraged it and supported it. And I guess the rationale behind that was, in the early days, there was this emergent concern about safeguarding and abuse of trust. In a position where lots of people were potentially going to be very vulnerable. And we felt that this highly localized approach was by far the simplest and easiest way to overcome those concerns, because if you're going to be supported by somebody who you knew or at the very least recognized from within your own street, that provided the simplest way of ensuring that there was a level of trust and safeguarding would become an issue. Not foolproof by any means, but the simplest way that we all, every day, navigate our world in a safe way is by trust. So that was our real focus, to encourage that. And this really proved to be far more powerful than any of us could probably have predicted, with across the whole county and city hundreds, if not thousands, of street-based, whether it was technical through WhatsApp or whether it was good old-fashioned postcard and notes going through letterboxes. These groups informally, formed all over the place. The second stage for us was mutual aid. Again, we didn't initiate that, but we quickly moved to try and support mutual aid groups in all of their shapes and sizes and varieties with advice and practical help on safeguarding, funding, volunteer management, and all sorts. And a whole raft of new guidance and template material was created. And we estimate that we've probably been working with in the region of 80 to 90 mutual aid groups across the county, across the year. Some very tiny, some up to whole district level in one case. And it's also important to say that lots and lots of existing PCSE organisations moved into that space, so they began to sort of operate in that space, and effectively became mutual aid groups. What we then did by early April was we, kind of a couple of weeks in, we worked with the county council and the district council to establish more of a kind of safety net, where if you needed help but you couldn't or hadn't been able to access that localised support, then you could call an emergency hotline and get signposted through. And over time, the district councils took more of a lead role in that, in terms of kind of call centre triage. But we worked very closely with a number of lead organisations, which themselves then had networks within their district. And it would be wrong for me not to talk about those leads. So they were Realise Foundation in Newcastle under Lyme. There were 3 of them in the Moorlands Haregate Community Centre in Leek, Biddulph Youth and Community Zone, and Moorlands Homelink in Cheadle. In Stafford, it was Rising Brook Church. In Cannock Chase, it was the Coronavirus Support Network, which has mothballed or disbanded since. Lichfield, it was at the time Lichfield and District Live at Home Scheme. It's now MHA Communities. And in Tamworth, it was Communities Together. And then in East Aspert and Albion Community Trust. And those relationships have continued and grown since that initial emergency. And I think what we ended up with, therefore, in Staffordshire was that the county council ended up taking that kind of safety net, last resort, urgent kind of emergency role, dealing with the kind of really urgent, we're about to run out of food within 24 hours type response, whereas we could have ended up with a very different setup, actually, which wouldn't, in our view, wouldn't have been a good thing. It could have been something that was much more top down. It could have been something that was kind of overly bureaucratic and complicated and probably much less effective. I'm not saying it was perfect, but I think actually Staffordshire is seen as having done a good job of this. So here are some of the basic stats around COVID. Nearly 2,000 came forward, of which we did manage to signpost almost 80% of them onto opportunities. There was a huge oversupply, actually. Initially, there was more volunteers than were needed. We did manage to signpost a good portion of those through. Huge surge through our website, 80,000 hits. So this is just March to June period. Massive surge in demand for advice there. 312 organisations just in that period. Over 250 new news stories, 140 participants at 18 online forums during that period. I think that's probably more than we would normally, or nearly as many as we'd run in a year. And then 117 participants at 15 bespoke COVID training sessions. And just in that period, we were able to count that member organisations had secured that inward investment of 1.85 million. So, an amazing accolade really to our sector in how it responded. I shan't labour the point, but yeah, it's just been immense, and I can only give you a little snapshot really of what's been done in the last year by all of you and all of our members. So I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about a couple of other things. These are some of these are headings that if you were at our AGM a year ago, just over a year ago, I talked about then. So MP engagement is one I wanted to update you on. We did eventually meet as Team Staffordshire, so that's ourselves, VAS, Skivvies, Community Foundation, and forgive me if I haven't mentioned you, some other key bodies within the county and some elected VCSE reps. We met with MPs and some of their office staff in September. The outcome of that was, so I'm just looking at that photograph again now to one side. The more I see that photograph, the more I find it a really sexist photograph. The way all the men are kind of corralled around these 3 new female MPs at the bottom, and the 2 existing female MPs sort of just like hidden at the back somewhere. Anyway, we met with them, and what came out of that was they asked for our Staffordshire asks. What did we want them as a group of now, what are they, 9, 10 and 12 Conservative Staffordshire MPs, Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent MPs, so they're quite a decent kind of block. And what came from that was our sector wants lots of different things. We're a very diverse sector. So what we settled on was asking them for regular dialogue rather than a one-off meeting. We said we wanted to have a way that we could engage with them on a regular basis and bring the current issues to them and bring member organisations in front of them that otherwise perhaps haven't had that opportunity. So we sent that reply to them in January. I've only had 3 replies so far, unfortunately. Joe Gideon is one of them, who's in the middle at the front there. Kate Griffiths, who's on the bottom right there, is the other reply that I've had. And I'll come on to say that actually Theo Clark is the other person we've had a lot of engagement from, although she hasn't actually replied on this yet. So interestingly, it's those 3 newbie females that we've actually had the best engagement from. I have had a reply from Michael Fabricant, although his reply was to tell me that he wasn't allowed to reply because we're not based in Lichfield district, which is somewhat amusing to me, given that our registered office was in Lichfield until December this year, and I wrote to him 3 times last calendar year and he never replied to any of those, even though our registered office was in Lichfield at that time. So that's a little frustrating. More generally, as I say, Theo Clark's been pretty responsive. Others haven't been so responsive. Probably bottom of the list for us, maybe different for other organisations, is Gavin Williamson. He's the only one that I've never had any reply from, any acknowledgement of any kind. The others either attended, sent a representative to the meeting, or have replied to at least one of my communications in the last year. So this is a kind of still an area of work for us where we're trying to get that collective engagement with our elected representatives. So if anyone feels they're doing really well on that, it'd be great to have an offline conversation about what you're doing. The next one I just wanted to mention was our business plan. So there were some changes we talked about last year. We talked about volunteering and doing more events and only being able to do that really intensive support where it's resourced properly to do so. That's still the case, so we're still doing that, although we've had a very unusual year with volunteering. And of course, we're also having to look at how we do events much more online and engagement with prospective volunteers online, but that's broadly still our approach. I talked about membership a year ago, and we have smashed through the 1,000 member mark during the year, so I think we're about 1,030, something like that now, and still growing at a pretty steady rate. I talked also last year about growth in the training and consultancy, the paid for part of what we do. And again, that continues to grow, and we're expecting that to turn over £100,000 in the next financial year, which is positive from our point of view of business sustainability and income sources. It's also positive from our point of view in that members, organisations, VCSE organisations do, they will and do invest money in their own development, which is obviously an important thing from our point of view. And I talked about social prescribing a year ago as well, that we were embarking upon that. We're now in a position where we actually employ 10 link workers, and we collaborate with 4 partner member organisations in the delivery of that service. And then the other thing I think I mentioned a year ago was state of the sector, which I'm going to talk about more in a moment. I wanted to mention the carers partnership. So again, I talked about this a year ago. It was recommissioned, not quite on schedule, not quite on the original timetable, but it was recommissioned during 2020. We supported a local partnership bid of around 10 core partners, plus about 30 odd wider partners to bid, and we put in what we thought was a decent partnership bid. Unfortunately, that tender was awarded to Encompass, a national charity based in Preston, which was very disappointing from our point of view. We felt that we'd done exactly what we'd been asked to by the commissioners, bringing together a single local bid. It was all the more disappointing, really, because Encompass actually named us and some of the other local partners in their bid, and they did that without our knowledge or our consent, which was very frustrating and something that we have raised formal complaints about, but unfortunately they haven't got us anywhere. And we are about to meet shortly with the county council, which probably not in their minds, but certainly in my mind is a kind of a follow-up to that experience, to say, you know, okay, your position may be that you followed the process correctly and properly, but the outcome that we've got doesn't feel in tune to me with the whole of the rest of the ethos of 2020, which was, you know, about the local sector and local communities. So we'll let you know how that conversation goes. There has been the positive that the partnership that it's built around carers is actually a really good partnership. It's really strengthened that partnership and local working. So that is one positive that's come out of it. Two more slides, nearly there. So I always talk at the AGM about money. You know, ultimately, we're a membership-based organisation. We like to be transparent about where we're at in terms of our performance and operation. And for those of you who are chief execs, charity managers, chairs, or otherwise have the responsibility, you will know that resources and money occupies a good portion of your time, and it certainly occupies a good portion of mine. This is the kind of broad picture for Support Staffordshire. So the scale on the left starts at £1 million. So we're lucky in that we're a pretty large local organisation. We haven't seen our income diminish sort of catastrophically, but we have had some big dips of £200,000 or £300,000 at times. The red line is our expenditure. The green line is our income. So on a very basic level, we want the green line to be above the red line. We don't want to be spending more money than we've got coming in. Early on here, you can see we had this big drop. So this was around when we first merged. This was about survival in the first year. This was about managing a reduction and a big loss in income at that point, and managing to reduce our expenditure, which we did. But what we didn't manage to do, we just kept track really for a couple of years. So as our income went down, our expenditure went down. As our income went up, our expenditure went up. So we kind of tracked for a couple of years. I've put there then year 2 is S3, where we secured that significant new arrangement with the county council. That made a big difference for us, and you'll see then into year 3 and 4 we managed to flip it, and we managed to start having our income being more than our expenditure. So we had that kind of focused effort on bringing our costs down. We chopped off some projects that were costly projects and weren't really projects that were core business for us, and we managed to move to a sustainable position, and we've effectively managed to stay in that position where our income is just above our expenditure ever since. It doesn't look like that on this graph because you've got this year 5, 6 surge in income here, so this big bump. I've called this a Mansell windfall. So this is firstly the recognition in our accounts of a building that was effectively given to us by Lichfield CDS, and then a recognition when we sold it in December. We sold it for more than its value, so its previous value. So we've got this kind of windfall of what was a sale of an asset for just under £500,000, which again, we're incredibly lucky to have had that, be in that position. And then moving into the budget for next year, we're going to be investing some of that. So you can see that our income is still on an upward trend and our expenditures on an upward trend. We're going to invest some of that money next year in developing the organisation. So we're not just going to kind of sit on our laurels. Slightly nervous to write the word grow on here, because that always feels to me to be a very kind of business centric objective. You support Staffordshire doesn't have an overarching objective to grow and be bigger. You know, we're not trying to empire build here. What we're trying to get is something that's sustainable, but it so happens that appropriate opportunities that are right for us to be going for are, and over the last couple of years have continued to develop. But we've tried to do that with partners. So take social prescribing, we're subcontracting a number of those arrangements out to our member organisations. We're not just taking all of that for ourselves. So that's the money position. And then I'll just finish by, we finally got round to publishing some figures on the state of the sector based upon the census data that all of our members complete for us. And we're now going to try and do this every year or two. And you know, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. We're a significant player in the local economy. You know, if as some of my colleagues use the terminology that we're kind of Dunkirk-like flotilla of small boats rather than a great big dreadnought. If we were one single entity, one single company, we would be a really big player. We'd be a big employer. We'd have a big turnover. We'd be very significant in terms of the health and social care space, because 46% of you operate broadly in that health and care space. You know, we're a significant part of the local health and care system, which has obviously been extremely important in the last 12 months. But actually only 2% have an income of more than £1 million. So that really is made up of lots and lots of small organisations, and indeed nearly half have no paid employees at all, despite the fact that, you know, there's nearly 8,000 employees in the rest of the sector. The volunteering figures, you know, amazing, 50,000. I think these are pretty conservative estimates, if I'm honest. And at minimum wage, that would put the value of that as, you know, almost doubling almost matching the turnover figure, the value of that unpaid for time that volunteers give. You told us that you work with over 500,000 beneficiaries. We've assumed there's a level of overlap there, that some of you are working with the same beneficiaries, and the assumption we've used is a very rough one, which is that on average each beneficiary is getting services from 2 organisations. I don't know how accurate that is. Undoubtedly some beneficiaries are getting support from multiple organisations, but then also quite a large number are probably only getting it from one. So if that were a reasonable assumption, that would mean that the membership of Support Staffordshire, such that is representative of the VCSE sector locally, we're reaching 1/4 of our population locally, which again I think is pretty impressive. So we're going to try and do more with that during the year, to try and use that data to demonstrate your value and you know, have a stronger voice. But we're also going to try and repeat this periodically so that we can see if there are any trends that emerge from it. So I am going to stop sharing there and throw it open to anybody who has any questions. I haven't been following the chat, so I'll have a quick look on that. But no, there aren't any. I don't. John Anderson, did you want to ask your question? Go for it.
Thank you, Gary. First of all, thank you to everybody from support staffs, and I think all of the member organisations will agree that it's an excellent and supportive organisation all year round. So I'd just like to say thank you, just to take the opportunity. My question is probably more of a comment, and it's something I did ask last year, and it's about our Staffordshire MPs that seem to give limited support, to say the least. I know 1 or 2 possibly are supporting Support Staffordshire, 1 or 2 really aren't supporting at all. And I do think with the numbers of voluntary groups, and which then nets down to individuals across Staffordshire involved with support, you know, membership, who have membership with Support Staffordshire, I feel that Support Staffordshire should send quite a stern letter to them, really, asking, or well, demanding really their support. They are paid out of public funds. This is a this Support Staffordshire deals with voluntary organisations, people that give up their time, and you've just put a lot of statistics up on the screen, and I think they should be reminded of that. All of the people volunteering for all of these organisations are voters, possibly not all necessarily voting for those particular MPs, but nonetheless they are all voters, and I do think we should have the support of every single one of them, not just a few out of out of how many. And I think a stern letter should go out to them, backed by all of the volunteer organisations across Staffordshire. Sorry for being confrontational, by the way.
I would say it was assertive, John, not necessarily confrontational. I mean, I suppose I would want to clarify and say that it doesn't mean they're not supportive of the sector, and certainly many of them, I'm sure, would say that they are very supportive of organisations within their constituencies. And certainly I've had some informal conversations with colleagues. So I hesitate, I was going to say even Gavin Williamson, I was going to say, with regards to Gavin Williamson, who have said to me that he does engage with them. So, I wouldn't wish to be too blanket about it, but I guess what we were looking for through this Team Staffordshire approach was to have a voice that was on behalf of the sector, that was a stronger voice rather than individual organisations with their individuals, albeit very valid individual sort of campaigns. So one of the things we talked about in the meeting was what happens now as EU funding comes to an end on the Shared Prosperity Fund, which has been much trailed, but there's still very little detail about how that will roll out. But that's actually been really important for some parts of our sector, particularly around employability and skills training for lots of vulnerable groups, and trying to have a sector-wide conversation about that particular issue. So I'm gonna push and try and figure out this thing that Michael Fabricant has effectively said to me is he won't respond to me because we're not based in his constituency, even though staff, volunteers, trustees and our member organisations live and work in his constituency. I don't know where he's saying it's a rule. I'm thinking, is it a rule or is that just something you've conveniently adopted because you get a large amount of inquiries? And I don't know. I want to try and get to the bottom of that one, because that would then mean that we need to have 13 points of contact, 13 people who are going to put the letter in their name and address on behalf of, which we can do. It's just a bit more complicated if we have to do it that way. Yeah, but other than that, I would agree, John, that I think we have a general sense that we're not as well engaged with as a sector. We're pretty sure that most of the MPs have fairly regular meetings with business leaders, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's absolutely right and appropriate for them to do that. But why don't they have the same with us as a sector? We know that they have regular meetings with the statutory sector. So yeah. Any other questions anybody wants to ask? Just having a quick look again at the chat. No? Grand. Okay, you've given me an easy time. So we've got our main event that I'm sure you came here for, really, which is, I'll introduce Karen. So delighted that Karen Bradshaw can join us today from Charity Finance Group, where she's the chief exec. I'll invite Karen to tell us a bit more about Charity Finance Group in her own words shortly. Karen is a barrister by training. She has been with CFG since 2010 and has supported lots of smaller charities and community organisations over the years. I'm told, including her local hockey club, if that's still true. But has also been a member of things like MTVO's National Assembly, Charity Sort Committee, so really linking the local to the national and including on government working parties. She also holds, and this is, I've definitely ad-libbed this bit, Karen, so forgive me. She holds what I have described as the equally enviable and unenviable job of being the chair of trustees of the Directory of Social Change. And if my board thinks that I'm occasionally outspoken, then try being the chair to Deborah Alcott-Tyler, which is Karen's job. Many of you might remember Deborah came and spoke a couple of years ago in the snow, and her talk was entitled, and this says it all if you weren't there, her talk was entitled, "Put Your Big Girl Pants On." So Karen was honoured with an OBE for services to charity, well deserved, in the New Year's Honours list this year. So let's have a virtual round of applause and welcome to Karen.
Thank you. Well, I have to say it's a blessing to be Deborah's chair, because she's just absolutely awesome and fantastic. So she is a handful at times, but then aren't we all? Okay, so when we were talking in prep for this, we were talking about covering quite a lot of different territory. So I'm going to try and do my best not to just talk at you rapidly. Hopefully also, because I'm at home, I'm not going to be interrupted by dogs barking, delivery agents or other things going on. I'm going to try and talk for a very short period of time and leave time to have a conversation, because I think you're probably all zoomed out with people sitting there and talking at you for hours on end. I will just say a little bit about CFG, because you won't necessarily be familiar with it. And then let's try and have a conversation and open up anything that you'd like to cover off. So CFG is what they call an umbrella organisation, much like Staff is and where you are right now at the AGM. We're a membership organisation. We have around 1,700 different charities of all different sizes, large and small, across all the different subsectors in membership, and we exist really to try and support those organisations to be as impactful as they possibly can. I often say, although we're about finance, we're not training people to be able to wave SORT compliant accounts in the faces of their friends at dinner parties. That's a means to an end. The end is actually increasing the impact that we have as a sector and the role that finance plays within that. And although you may have been a bit put off by the fact that I'm from Charity Finance Group, I'm not going to sit here and talk about accounting at you for the next half an hour or so. If that's what you were here for, I'm sorry to disappoint you. And I'm definitely not going to only talk about the financial landscape, because I think that actually at the moment, whilst the finances are very prominent in all of our minds, there's so much more for us to be talking about in the general landscape of the sector. So the things that Gary and I were talking about covering off were around things like the threats and opportunities that we've experienced over the last 12 months or so, the relationship with government, the financial landscape, opportunities for the future. And I've promised you that I'm only going to speak for about 10-15 minutes and then have a conversation with you. So given that vast array of different things that I've just reeled off, there's no way that I'm going to cover any of them in great depth, and I'll probably leave more loose ends hanging than my knitting. So let's go through some of those themes, and I'll pose a few observations about them. So firstly, I want to talk about the positive things that have happened over the last 12 months, because I think if you're anything like me, you'll be sitting there thinking, is this ever going to end? It all feels a little bit draining, and I feel pulled thin. And if you then add into the mix all of the other things that are going on at the moment with Sarah Everard's death and murder and all of these other things that are highly charging, life just feels a little bit sticky and difficult. So let's have a look at some of the positives that have come out over the last 12 months. One of the first things for me has been, and actually Gary and Jan have both talked about this, the amount of collaboration and generosity of spirit and coming together that I have witnessed, both at a local level but also at a national level. So the collaboration between the infrastructure organisations nationally has been mind-blowing. I've never seen it this good, where we have spoken to each other sometimes on a daily basis to really collaborate and put a case to government about the role that civil society plays within the wider context of society, and the need for government to stand behind the actions of individuals and community organisations. And so that collaboration is something that I won't pretend for one moment hasn't given its moments of challenge and difficulty, but has been so refreshing and so wonderful to experience. And I hope that it continues long after this current situation, that once we get through that. The willingness of people to get behind and to flex and embrace change, and the pace at which they're prepared to go on that ride has been mind-blowing as well. So I'm not just thinking about things like what we're doing now, having a Zoom conversation, and the willingness of people to participate in services that are delivered from somebody sat on the end of their bed with a laptop on their knee. I'm also talking about the willingness to turn on a sixpence and do services in a very different and imaginative way when one particular course of action or habitual delivery has been closed to us. The willingness to just turn on a sixpence and do something different so that beneficiaries' needs are met has been absolutely phenomenal. The resilience of the sector, when we came into this, our thoughts around the figures that were likely to be suffered in terms of loss of income, loss of fundraising income, all of those sorts of drops in your financial health and well-being, we were anticipating an awful lot of charities going to the wall, an awful lot of charities. And the fact that we haven't seen that quantity of charities going to the wall is not because we over-egged the pudding in the first place. It's because of the sheer hard work and bloody mindedness of people working in the sector. You have dug deep, you have done everything with nothing, and you've been hugely resourceful and resilient, and I commend you for that. And I think that it's something that politicians need to listen to too. It wasn't because we were over aching it and we were shouting crying wolf like the boy in the story. It's because we've managed to cut costs, drive up income, and find other ways of delivering things on a shoestring. And that's what the sector has always been good at, and it's been phenomenal at it in this particular period of time. More so, I think, than many other sectors, actually. The digital switch, the things that would have taken us years and working parties and massive amounts of investment, and somebody scrutinising this and a risk register and a Gantt chart and goodness knows what else, have happened literally overnight. Things have been taken on board, and we've had a much more test and almost entrepreneurial approach to digital. We've tried something, if it doesn't work, we've ditched it and tried something else, and we've just made that work, and that has been really refreshing. And I do want to say that actually the government's support has been phenomenal in some ways. I want to celebrate the fact that we have had this unprecedented amount of money that has been made available to us through direct schemes, but also through things like the coronavirus job retention scheme, and where it's appropriate, the loan schemes. But, and there's always a but when it comes to the funding side of things, when you consider that the amount of money that was earmarked for the sector was 750 million, and in that 3-month period that we thought, 12 months on, I can't believe that we thought that it'd be 3 months, that 3-month period that we thought we were going to be suffering the worst of the effects of this pandemic, we were facing a £4.3 billion hole. Then it starts to give you a bit of context as to the inadequacy of the monies that we received. And when you then throw into the mix the fact that, I won't name names, but large supermarket brands received rate relief that was equivalent to almost the same amount of money that the entire sector received, and at the same time concurrently gave out dividends to almost equal value, then you start to question the ideology and the decisions and the priorities that underpin the way that we as a society look at civil society and the role that it plays. So let's briefly talk about the negative side of things, and then I'm going to open it up for us to have a conversation about various different bits. So on the negative side, again, I think you've touched on this, Gary. There is a lack, I think, of political understanding, and this isn't a party political point because I think it applies equally across all political spectrums. When we talk about the charity sector or the civil society movement or communities, we tend to think of something that is this huge homogenous group that all act and react in the same way, and it's just not true. We've got, if you just look at England and Wales, nearly 170,000 organisations, and they span from the very small to the very big. They span from the domestic and purely voluntary to the multinational global enterprises that have retail arms bigger than Next. And we talk about these all in the same breath as sector. And that, I think, is a massive problem, particularly when you have government ministers and advisors saying, well, you're sitting on great big loads of endowments. Whoa, you've got huge reserves. You can cope for the next 12 months, without recognising that individual charities often have little or no reserve in the bank or little or no assets. And if you're an endowed charity, you can't just spend that endowment out. And even if you could, you'd be spending the family silver and spending in a way that did not support your beneficiaries longer term, because it would only be dealing with the immediate crisis and not giving that longevity of support that our communities and beneficiaries need so much. The government do not understand business model. They tend to think in streams. So they'll thinking loneliness or mental health, and it will be these very neat subsectors. And life is not like that. It's not a nice, neat subsector. If you look at mental health, you'll find a variety of different business models in just the way you would in any other part of the charity sector. And that's not the same as in business. In business, I think it is much more simple to be able to say these are the kinds of business models that are attributable to, say, leisure or to, say, airlines. So I think that's been a real difficulty. And I think that the environment in which we have been operating has been very emotionally charged for us as a sector as well, because we are dealing with people who are already disadvantaged, who are already sidelined, who are already suffering need, whether it is as a result of their health issues that don't stop for COVID, say cancer, heart, etc., or whether it's about poverty, about the relief of poverty, about rent problems. And we're already dealing with people that are on their knees. If you then add on a pandemic, you exacerbate need. And I think that's one real sad thing for me. I heard it put beautifully, which is we are not all in the same boat. Despite what people have said about this being a great leveller, it is not a great leveller. We are in the same storm, in the same ocean, in very, very different vessels. And I think that is a perfect way of encapsulating where we are. So I'm going to pause there, having perhaps opened a few questions or set a few hairs running, and hopefully have a conversation with you about what your experiences have been, and anything that you want me to tell you, I will candidly answer if I can. I might not be able to tell you some things, but I will absolutely try and give you my honest answer on anything. Nothing is off limits.
There's a challenge. Give us a wave then, folks, if you want to chip in with a comment or observation.
John Anderson. You're on mute, John.
Sorry, they didn't want to unmute then. Hello, Karen. Are there any figures, any statistics for how many charities across the UK have actually failed due to lack of funds because of COVID? Because it was a tough time, especially in the first lockdown, and I've not heard or seen any figures for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that's been really difficult for us to pin down. We know that 1 in 10 in response to our surveys anticipated closing, but Charity Commission haven't been able to give us data that says actually from England and Wales, obviously it only deals with England and Wales, this is the number of charities who have closed. We know from private meetings, they've shared some data around the, let's put it this way, absence or negative position of reserves that some organisations have held, and we know that that has sharply increased. We also know that there's been a sharp increase in the number of organisations who are late filing their accounts, which is also one of their risk factors that they identify when it looks at charities that are potentially facing financial difficulty. So the short answer is we don't have a figure, but the longer answer is we're working on trying to pull lots of different data sets together to be able to give a much more holistic picture of the sector. And although we haven't seen that level of collapse that we initially thought we would see, as I say, I don't think that's because they haven't experienced difficulty. I think it's because they've worked really hard to try and bridge the gap between dropping in income and rising demand. There's Lisa Healings.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Just wanted to get your opinions on what you think is going to happen sort of post 31st of March. I know there's lots and lots of organisations out there who've got to spend the funding they've had by the 31st of March or else, with no ability to carry it forward. And there's not a lot of indication there's going to be funding coming for the sector post-March. There's been some unhelpful comments about, you know, we can reopen our charity shops and just raise money again. So I just wanted to get your opinions on that.
Yes, so this is I'm afraid where I'm not going to be particularly hopeful, and I'm not going to give much in the way of positive news, I'm afraid. We have repeatedly had conversations with DCMS about the state of the sector. I think it is fair to say, and I don't think I'm being unduly harsh to say it in this way, that government's position is you've had 750 million, you've got access to the other schemes, job done. And I don't think that we are likely to be able to get any further significant packages of support. And if we do get any further support, it's likely to be small sums of money and not large sums of money. So that then leaves us as a coalition of infrastructure bodies thinking, well, what do we do about that? Because it's very clear to me that whilst in some quarters the view might be the immediate crisis has passed, we are still in an emergency in many areas of the sector. And I think that when you then potentially put that together with the idea, and we saw this post-recession in 2010 after the last banking crash, that we know that the sector suffers a second wave, if you forgive the analogy, of financial hardship after an initial economic shock. And we've not really seen the full economic shock hit because everything's being pushed down the road with, you know, furlough and various other supportive measures. So I fear that the worst is yet to come actually financially for the sector, and that we're probably looking at April next year before we start to feel the full force of that. And you're going to be feeling the full force of it with a depleted and tired staff, with little or no reserves in many cases, with rising demand because we're going to start seeing people laid off from when furlough comes to the end, etc. So it's a terribly financially bleak picture for me that I don't think we have any immediate answer from the government on. So what do we do as a sector about it? We are pushing really, really hard to try and secure further monies. We're trying to give them information that demonstrates that need. And as I said before, unfortunately, what they want is a picture of this sector is the one that is going to need supporting, let's say, mental health or loneliness. That's not how the financial position is hitting the sector. It's much more dependent on your business model. It's much more dependent on how much reserve you had in reserve going into the crisis. And it's also been very much about whether or not the services that you're delivering have been directly supporting COVID and therefore you could access emergency funding, or whether you've just been dealing with the things that you normally deal with that won't wait for COVID but can't qualify for extra money. So we can't identify in the way that government want us to need. And therefore we have to start thinking about how can we demonstrate need in a different way. And one of the things that I was actually talking to my policy team this morning about was looking at the CJRS, the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. For many of you who are able to use furlough, that's great as long as it continues to September. For those of you who can't use furlough because the work cannot be mothballed, how do we get over that problem? And we're working on putting together some information that models how much that would cost the Exchequer. I don't know if you also saw yesterday, the NAO released its report into the government's funding of the charity sector during the crisis. And within the detail, very, very interesting, lots of detail in there, but within the detail was a suggestion that there is £25 million that has not been distributed of that original 750, and that will go back to the Exchequer because it's unclaimed. But when you put that alongside the National Lottery information, you can see that actually they received demand-led almost twice the rate of the awards that they gave. So we're looking at whether or not we can use that sort of 25 million that's going back to HMT and reposition it so that we can, for example, say, if you're furloughing people, can they volunteer in a different way? So if you've got staff in a charity shop, for example, could you redeploy them somewhere else and still claim the furlough? That would cost the Exchequer nothing because they're already on furlough. Could we expand furlough or the concept of furlough and change it to being a job support or salary support type scheme so that those of you who can't currently furlough can still receive something akin to furlough to support those salaries? And I think we probably have a little bit more of a chance of pushing that, because you have people like Bernard Jenkins who are very much against that concept, for that concept of being able to volunteer back to your own organisation. So there are tiny glimmers of hope in terms of the government, but do not pin any of your future hope on the fact that there'll be another big package, because I honestly don't think there will be. However good we are at influencing, we cannot give them the information they want, because what they want is not the reality. It just doesn't match with what is actually happening on the ground. So I apologise for depressing you all. I think I saw Esther's hand go up briefly as Lisa was speaking. Did you have?
I was going to ask a sort of similar question to say, actually, you know, a lot of COVID funding had come out during the last year, but it was more about, you know, what's going to happen in the future if you've been doing a COVID response, which we have. So very similar to what Lisa was asking, really.
Yeah.
We've actually expanded, you know, and took on more staff and things like that to deal with the crisis. So we're in a slightly unusual position, I guess.
Yeah, well, the only thing I would, there's my dog barking in the background, apologies. The only thing I would say is, whilst there is not likely to be money from government, I do think that there are other things that we should focus on. Firstly, during this pandemic, people have really questioned what's important to them. That's a moment in time that we can capitalise on. And I don't mean in a cynical sense. I mean in the sense of tapping into that generosity and showing them what you do on the ground. How many people do you know that will be totally oblivious to the rich different ways in which communities are supported by charitable and voluntary organisations and social enterprises? They'll be oblivious to it. They won't think that their village hall or their playing field or their child care or their church or a multiplicity of different ways are actually run by the voluntary sector. And I think that when we can show them that's the difference we make, we can perhaps tap into that real sense of, I need to have a purpose. I need to be connected. People want to be connected and belong. And I think that's a positive. Secondly, I have to be really, really positive about the foundations. The foundations have smashed it out of the park during this pandemic. They have relaxed the conditions on their grants. They've elongated terms of and support. They've been really, really great. We personally, as CFG, have had 2 of our funders come to us and say, are you all right? Can we help you in some way? Can we give you a bit more money? And that has been really, really welcome too. So I think there is that sort of pent up desire and hope. And I also think once we can start meeting each other, I think there will be a few more people that are prepared to do this, return back to their sponsored things and have their charitable activities to come together in a way that isn't just about socializing, it's about socializing with purpose. So I would tie those things together, and I think that, you know, I can't give you a simple solution to the 31st of March crisis that we're all going to face, but I do think that there are moments of positivity and hope that we can hang on to. Andy Collins is the title.
Thanks, Karen. And what do you think the effect of Brexit is going to be on the sector?
Oh, that's a good one. Did any of you notice that Brexit was conspicuous by its absence in the budget? And it's actually not been a topic of conversation at all by most of the politicians. I think there are a lot of things that we potentially could push for as a sector. The deal with Europe had within it, and although it's a standard term, I don't think that we should just necessarily go, oh, it's a standard term and write it off, that there would be a civil society forum that the government has committed to having in order to talk about the relationship with Europe. And I think we should get involved in that and try and dictate the terms of how that civil society forum works, so that we can start trying to change the narrative away from markets and capital into social capital and social movement, because nobody is asking that big question at a political level. What kind of society do we want to live in? And I think that's the big question that we need to be answering, rather than thinking about whether markets work and how we protect different parts of the economy. Because I think the economy actually is underpinned in every form and shape by charities, directly and indirectly. There are some very specifics that I think we have an opportunity to try and influence, whatever way we voted, whether we are Remaining individuals or Brexiteers. And they are things like state aid. The state aid cap was often peddled to me as a reason why the government could not support and stand behind social change movement organisations. And now that we are no longer required to follow the European Union state aid rules, then I think there's a great opportunity for government to rethink how it supports and encourages social change through its modern state subsidy, which is the equivalent of the state aid side of things. We've also got things like irrecoverable VAT, that there have been many conversations with the Economic Secretary to the Treasury that I've been, as nearly said, it's privileged to be involved in, but I'm not sure that many of you would have felt that that was a particularly privileged position to sit through. But and similarly, we've been told that the European Union's rules are the things that stop the government from addressing these things, and we totally understand, Karen, but you know, our hands are tied. Well, your hands aren't tied now, guys, so let's try and change those. There are many of those sorts of things that I think we can and should address, and I think that there are other fronts that we can push on around the tax environment that we perhaps could not have done so previously. So things like VAT on shared services. Most of you don't share services because it incurs VAT, and therefore you need to save more than 20% before you can even get out the starting blocks. And with the strike of a pen, the government could remove that. So there are elements that we could look at. But I will be slightly controversial perhaps, and I hope that this is not seen as a particularly party political view, or that I'm nailing my colours to a particular mast. But I do think that any economic hit that the society experiences as a result of Brexit will not be linked to Brexit. It will be covered by the coronavirus pandemic, and everything. I think you see it already, all of the difficulties that we've had in products coming through, in supply chains, in developing things like the UK SPF, the Shared Prosperity Fund that's supposed to replace the European funding mix, have all been affected by the pandemic. And that's the thing that the government is blaming, if you like, for us not being able to nail down some of the detail. So I can't give you an absolute of what I think we will look like. I think there are potentially opportunities that we should be exploiting. I think there are quite a few risks for us as a sector. And I think one of the wider issues, which is not necessarily about Brexit, but I think it comes from the same sort of mindset that's at the heart of government at the moment, is the impact of things like reducing the international aid and development budget from 0.7 to 0.5, and then stripping out a lot of the money from going to charitable organisations and repurposing it as monies that go to commercial enterprise. And I think that damages our relationship, and it damages our ability to support others across the world, which can only harm us, I think. Gary.
I'd let others have a chance before I chipped in. I wanted to ask you a question about kind of national leadership of the local sector. So for us, that means bodies like our national body, NAVCA, NCVO, yourselves, Directory of Social Change, and a raft of others. And I wonder what your view is on kind of how damaging you think some of the change that there's been, and some of the fairly controversial stuff sitting behind that. So in some cases, just change. So for example, the NAVCA chief exec changed at the back end of last year. It's been vacant for a period. I think that's been a problem for us at this time. There's been a change in the leadership of NCVO with a backdrop of serious allegations around bullying and harassment within the organisation historically. And then this week, there's been a similar issue with Chartered Institute of Fundraising, I believe. And I just wonder whether you feel that that's, you know, when that happens, do you kind of go, oh, because you just know it's going to make your day job harder because you're going to be easier to dismiss as a collective of leaders?
So I think it depends what lens you're looking through. If you're looking at it in terms of the relationship with government, then I think anything that shows a divided sector works against us. And one of the things that we've really seen as a positive, we have been able to influence the narrative in government and the discussions in government. We might not have been able to secure great pots of money beyond the money that we secured last spring, but we have definitely shifted the conversation. It is definitely changed, and it's changed because they can't divide and conquer us, and we are collectively working together with the space cut out for different elements of the infrastructure organisations to take the lead, so that I'm not having to cover all of the things and someone else isn't having to cover all of the things, but we're dealing with those areas that we're best placed to deal with. And that's been really hugely positive. So any fractures in that, any weakness in the leadership voice, any withdrawing from the public space for embarrassment, for accountability, for any of the different elements of that can only be bad for us and our relationship with government, in my view. I don't personally think that we should have one voice anyway. I think be careful what you wish for. I think that having a variety of voices enables you to maintain diversity, and when you have a monopoly, then you end up with, I think, an awful lot of people being kept out of the room rather than brought into it. I don't think it's an inclusive move to have one body that sits as a sort of a mega infrastructure organisation. In terms of the lens of the sector itself, I think we're incredibly good at beating ourselves up. And I do not want to, as a woman who's experienced sexual harassment and sexual assault, I've experienced bullying, I would not want to diminish anyone's experience of prejudice, harm, assault, any of the different elements of that particular side of the complaints that we've seen come out. But as a sector, we need to recognise that this is not just the sector's problem, this is society's problem. I experienced sexual harassment when I did not work in the charity sector. I was working in a different space. I experienced sexual assault not within the charity sector. That's not to say it doesn't exist. It absolutely does, as we've seen. But to think that this is a unique problem or that it's worse here, I think is naive. And we have this habit of beating ourselves up and the sector eating itself. And I think that is unhealthy. What I think we should be doing is focusing on what unites us, where our commonality is and what we can do to move forward. And I also think we need to listen a bit more and listen to understand each other, not listen to reply, because I think that's the problem. An awful lot of the responses that you've seen in the ham-fisted way in which some of this debate has been dealt with is because I'm listening to you, but before I've even formed an understanding of what you're saying, I've already formed my reply. And that reply is probably about managing my reputation, ensuring that I don't experience further loss, etc., rather than actually creating a space where we genuinely understand what each other's perspectives are. Because actually, I think people will feel much more about accountability and justice if they feel heard. You know, I know that the greatest harm has been done to me personally when I haven't been heard, not when I haven't got my own way. That's a very different thing. And I understand, I won't go into the details, but I understand from personal experience within my family unit, seeing allegations of a very serious nature not being taken forward by the police, and understanding why, wearing my legal hat, it hasn't got over the evidence threshold to be able to do that. So these are very emotive, very difficult areas that we need to carve out space for humanity and understanding. And we need to not jump into the allure of public hangings, because I think, it's very intoxicating to get into that space where you want to see somebody hanging from the nearest branch. It's not good. It's not good. And I feel very strongly that that's not a healthy way for any sector, let alone ours, where we're supposed to be much more socially aware and aware of our interplay and harm that we can cause. I don't think that that's helpful. I don't know if that totally answered your question, but
it was a good answer. I could do a follow-up, but I want to see if anybody else wants to chip in.
I can see Jill's
Jill.
hand raised. I was just flicking to the other screen to make sure I wasn't missing anyone. Jill.
You've answered, you've spoken about response to a couple of really big issues. So could I chuck another one at you? Climate change. What impact do you think that has or opportunity has for our sector, perhaps in relation to social capital and local cohesion and that, you know, local solutions to things? What are your thoughts around that?
So I think for me, that is probably the single biggest issue that we are facing. And I don't mean us as a sector, I mean us as a society. And I think it sits behind a lot of what I was saying around the big question of asking ourselves, what kind of society do we want to live in? Well, expand that, what kind of world do we want to live in? And I feel very strongly that the sector is well placed to show a different way, that we shouldn't be pursuing any form of operation that is extractive. We should be thinking about how do we stop talking about war analogies and sporting analogies and machine analogies and start talking about nature analogies and ecosystems, because that's really what we are. We're part of a big ecosystem. And as much as we like to kid ourselves that we're just cogs in a big wheel, I mean, you hear that all the time, don't you? And we try to mechanize things. That's for control and convenience. It's not about reality. Reality is much more ecosystem based. And if we can start as a sector leading the way in showing how social capitalism, where you don't just think about extracting money, and actually, by the way, capital markets aren't supposed to work like that either. At some point along the journey, we lost this duty from maximizing shareholder value and swapped it out for maximizing shareholder return, financial return. That's not what the law said, that's not what was intended, but that's where we've driven ourselves. And that's why you end up seeing with, for example, the children's market, things being commoditized and you having private entities that are in there to make money. I don't object to them making money, but if they're making money, that necessarily takes them down the route of not doing the things that don't make them money. And most of us are operating in a space that doesn't make money. And to go back to the comment about the 31st of March that Lisa made and this sort of assumption we can just all open up again, income in the sector and activity in the sector are not neatly matched. So the fact that this charity shop might be shut, that income that was generating was subsidizing something else going on. So you've got this huge, great big open hole that you are trying to fill, and opening the shops isn't going to cut it. So I think that's a roundabout way of saying I think that the environment is part of the whole of this. And I think we should be driving the conversation that says stop extracting and start thinking about how we can contribute so that everything we do, whether it's our carbon footprint or whether it is the way that we occupy space in a community, adds to and enriches the lives of the people around us rather than extracts what's good for us. And I think if we as a sector lead by example, think about the coalition that I was just talking about. 12 months ago, 18 months ago, there is no way that we would have been able to have the sorts of conversations that we have where there has been generosity of spirit to say, you do that and we'll do this, because we're not in it for ourselves. We're thinking about the greater good. And I think that's the important point that we all need to do and to pursue. The last thing I'd say is, I think with the environment particularly, we have a danger of switching people off and preaching to the converted. And then you only ever have the people in the room that are doing something already. And I think we have to start learning to meet people where they are, not where we wish they would be. And that means meeting them halfway and trying to understand where they are and trying to give them small and manageable things that they can do. It's like the old analogy, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You can't, if you give somebody an elephant, say, eat that, it's too big. If you say to someone, here's a mountain, climb it. But if you show them how they can put one foot in front of the other, before they know it, they're at the summit. And I think that's the thing that we need to do as a group of voluntary organisations, is see those things where we can add to each other and complement each other. Nobody's asked me about mergers, actually, which I thought might come up, because every single session I've done so far, people have gone, is the answer merger? No, the answer isn't merger. However, I do think the answer is collaborating, and if you are looking at merger, it should be a strategic merger, not a financially driven one. And it shouldn't be about you doing this thing and we do exactly the same, let's come together. It should be, we do this, you do that, and together the outcome for our beneficiaries could be so complementary and so life transforming that we should do it together. And that, for me, is where we could lead other sectors, because we don't have that huge competitive market driven approach that is rife elsewhere. Did that sort of answer your question without sounding like I was sidestepping the environment? Good. Have I talked you all to death? Are there any other questions or comments?
Can I add one last one then?
Of course.
Any others, I'll use my privileged position. I just want to link back to something where John raised earlier, and I think I copied you into my fantasy football team cabinet on Twitter a few weeks ago, which I didn't actually start the conversation, but I chimed into it, which was around the kind of fantasy football team was who would the government be if it was made up of the voluntary sector, basically. Yeah. I think I had Deborah as PM, and I think I had you as Chancellor, and lots of great other suggestions came in. But behind that slight silliness, there was a serious point for me, which is that would you think I'm right in saying that as a sector we're very poorly represented in politics compared to either career politicians, business people going into politics? And I wonder if you think that's true, and if you think it's true, is it a problem, and why is it true?
Well, there's quite a few politicians actually that come from a charity background on both sides. So Penny Mordaunt, Danny Kruger, and then Jess Phillips and Lisa Nandy, and there are lots of others that I think started life from a sort of social voluntary background. But I do think they are in the minority, significant minority, of course. I'm less worried about there being lots and lots of voluntary sector individuals. I'm more worried about there being lots and lots of incredibly personally wealthy individuals. I think that's the bit that skews it the wrong way. When you are not able to look at some of the questions around the wicked, sticky social problems of poverty, and I don't mean you were hard up and you had to manage your budget. I mean, you don't know where the next meal's coming from. You have no light, heat. Your children are hungry. I'm talking about poverty. When you have no lived experience of these sorts of things, or you've never experienced sexual assault, or you've never experienced racism, or you can't comprehend that, and I don't think that's healthy for policy making. I also think that party politics is shockingly awful. If I had my own way, I would rip up the whole of the way that we do democracy and start again, because I think that party politics drives you down the short term. You're doing what needs to be done to get elected next time. You're not doing something that is required in order to make life better for society. And I think actually civil society is the thing that smooths out the bumps between those elections. We're the thing that's constant, if you like, and free of party politics, although some would say we're a bunch of lefts with governance that is a bunch of rights, and I think actually the truth is probably somewhere between the two. So I do think we are underrepresented. Where I'm more worried about us being underrepresented are things like question time. The number of times you see comedians, celebrities, business entrepreneurs who frankly have nothing to say about anything, or have everything to say that is quite frankly meaningless on a number of scores, and the absence of having a civil society voice, when actually I think it should be the other way around. Civil society has an opinion and operates in every space of society. That bit worries me. we've had, well, you can probably name 2, 3, 4 maybe individuals that I can name. Bernardo's, Javid Khan, Van der Wojtowski at the Equality Trust. You know, there are a couple that have been on question time, but we're absent from that public discourse. And I think that is because when you talk to the public and you ask them to describe charity, what they will tend to talk to you about is the local, voluntary, small. Ask them to name a charity and they will immediately reach for a household brand. And that disconnect between those two things, we have not as a sector grappled with. And we've not grappled with it, dare I say it, for convenience, because in order to extract money, because that's the way we've been driven down, return on investment for your fundraising ratios, you've got to maximise front line, you've got to minimise back office, all of these things that have been the narrative that's underpinned public discourse, scandalous CEO pay, you know, all of these things focus on the wrong bit of the equation, and they drive us down the route that is much more business-like than it needs to be, in all the wrong ways. I think we should professionalise, we should invest in our back office, we should invest in our digital, and all of the things that enable us to maximise our impact. And that's the only growth we should be going for, is growth in impact, not growth in bottom line. I don't think my success is measured by how much I've got in the bank, how much I've managed to increase the turnover of CFG, and how many staff I've got, and how many members I've got. For me, it's how many people am I reaching, how many lives am I changing, am I impacting people? And I think that's the same for everyone in this room. So, you know, I think there are lots of challenges around the public discourse piece, and we have not always been well placed to challenge those. And we've sometimes been almost the worst at beating our own parts of our own sector up. The example that I would give you is the large small charity piece, where large charities have become seen in some places pariahs, predators that have muscled out and used smaller organisations as bid candy, in the same way that you've seen Serco and Capita and all the others see them as big candy. Whereas if our mindset, going back to what I said before, was about what kind of society do we want and how do we best work together so that we are greater than the sum of our parts, that generosity of spirit that puts the beneficiary first and not the trustees' duties, that puts output and ecosystem at the heart, rather than trustees' annual report and how much can I show on the CV that I've grown the organisation. It's that kind of narrative that I think has been much more toxic to us. I think toxic would probably be the word I'd reach for. John Anderson. You're on mute again, John, I'm sorry.
I do agree that party politics are actually quite disturbing, is the word I would use. But back to our MPs that don't seem to like to engage with a lot of charities. They'll engage with a few flag flying ones that you've mentioned. And I believe it's because charities as a rule are dealing with negative issues. Most MPs want to say, look at my constituency, we've got no homelessness, we've got no poverty, we've got no policy is probably better actually, no poverty, we've got no children in need, we've got no mental health issues, we've got no addiction. They don't want to draw attention to these issues. Most of us, I'm sure, in the room deal with these negative issues, and I feel that the MPs try to sweep that under the carpet. So for them to visit each and every charity here is for them to be showing up deficiencies in their constituency and bringing up questions perhaps of why do you have these issues in your constituency, why aren't you as an MP doing something about it? And I think this is the big issue really, and this is why they don't want to engage. And I still do think what I said earlier to Gary, that I think with the volume of members within Support Staffordshire, it is a force to be reckoned with, to go to those MPs and say, you will engage with us, not please engage with us, but, you know, to tell them that they're going to.
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot of truth in what you just said. I think one of the issues that I've experienced, particularly in my conversations with DCMS, so at government level, often they will say, oh gosh, you're asking for money again, you're holding up your begging bowl, you're saying, please sir, give us some more. And I without sort of breaching confidentiality, I did say to one of them, it's a shame that the person that you're having a go at in that scenario is Oliver Twist and not the Beadle. And that's, for me, the heart of it. We deal with things that are difficult and uncomfortable and messy. When Rishi Sunak described the sector as gentle, my word, are you living on a different planet? The sector doesn't deal with gentle, it deals with heartbreak and difficulty and the parts of society none of us really want there to be, that we don't want to see. And that's really, really difficult. That's really difficult. As you say, you're shining a light on and you're holding a mirror up to the darkest bits of society. But you know what? You're also shining a light on and holding a mirror to the most beautiful parts of society. You know, the thing that we do is not all negative. And I think maybe that's one of the things that we need to do, is we need to start shining a light on the really positive things that we do, and the fact that we are the glue that sticks everyone together. You know, without civil society, we don't just not have a safety net, we have no society. You know, I really strongly believe that. You take out civil society organisation from any village or community or town, and you will suddenly start seeing rises in crime, rises, huge poverty, lots of different things will start to unravel. So I think that perhaps we should be saying, actually, as well as making the politicians listen, maybe we should be starting to give them those heartwarming, fantastic things that we're doing, and look what we could do more if you were to support us. If you stop treating us like the third sector and as an afterthought to policy decisions and brought us in and used our expertise, then we could start changing some of this stuff. You know, the conversation that I was having the other day past the budget about the help to learn, help to grow. I don't know if you saw it, it was announced in the budget. It's a small thing in inverted commas, but it's a skills-based thing that could have been really helpful for us as a sector. For some reason that I cannot fathom, and neither can DCMS, we've been excluded from that. It says on the bottom of it, charities are not eligible. Why? Did anybody think to talk to us about it? You see it with the apprenticeship levy. How many apprentices could we as a sector train up if only they would support the salaries of apprentices instead of just the training? But they're not thinking of it from a perspective of a civil society organisation that hasn't got that salary to be able to create a new post, but absolutely could give that lived experience, such a fantastic and rich lived experience that could be taken into any other sector. So I think that there are things that we can do to muscle into those conversations with real positivity, but we also need to recognise that's half the problem, that we are not seen as part of the fabric. We're seen as the thing that people do, rich and privileged people, frankly, do to poor and disadvantaged. You know, it's a very Victoriana kind of concept of charity in my mind.
I'm going to draw it to a close, folks, because I know Karen's got another appointment. I'm sure lots of you have other things to do before the end of your working day, and I want to let her have a loo break and a coffee break as well before she gets to that. If you haven't seen or read Karen's piece in response to the gentle comment by Rishi Sunak, that is well worth Googling. I have to say, probably the best piece of analysis stuff that I've read from the sector this year. It was brilliant, and it was very pertinent, but I also found it very inspiring that it came from our sector. And I'll finish by repeating what you've had lots of lovely comments on the chat, which you won't have had a chance to have a look at. So I'll see if we can pull them off and send them to you. But Jill says, we're very lucky to have you at a national level with your knowledge, insight and vision, and very much agree with that. So let's have a gentle round of applause from a non-gentle sector.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. Really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And keep being brilliant, because you are just awesome. I love working in this sector. Keep being brilliant.
I will get told off if I don't say this before we finish. Our Support Staffordshire Volunteer Star Award. So, I won't have mentioned even 1% of the brilliance of what people have done in this last year within our sector in Staffordshire. And so Trent, and there is an opportunity to award, to nominate people for our Volunteer Star Awards. The nominations close next Tuesday. Elaine, please put the link in the chat if you can. If you can't, I might be able to grab it. And also there is on a slightly more somber but also appropriate note, we've added in this year an in memoriam elements to that. So we can recognise people that are no longer with us but have played a significant role in the last couple of years since the last award ceremony. So the link is there if you want to click on it. It's pretty easy to find on our website as well. And they close, those nominations close next Tuesday. And I hope to see, well, we hope that all of you will be there, because this year they're going to be online. So there is no limit to the number that we can have in the audience, and they're going to be broadcast live on YouTube, more of which will come out in due course. But, thank you all very much for attending. I hope you've enjoyed this afternoon. And we have been recording this, so we are going to put it up, because I know somebody's already said they want to share Karen's piece with their team. I didn't say that at the beginning, so if there is anybody who does not wish to be seen on a recording, please just bob us an email and we'll blur you out. But otherwise, thank you very much, everybody, and see you all again soon.
Yes, thank you from me as well for everybody turning out on the first fine day we've had in ages and being stuck inside on a Zoom meeting. So much appreciated, and for your support. And thank you to Karen. It was a very informative afternoon. Thank you.